The Joe Rogan Experience.
It is the ultimate who knows question, but goddamn, I wish more people from S4 would come forth. If Bob really did work with all those people and they really were briefed the same way he was, if we could get more of those people to talk, that would be utterly fascinating.
Well, your show a big reach, so maybe this time somebody will hear it
Straight
and come
up.
forward.
Did anybody ever reach out to you that claimed to also have worked with Bob at S4?
A bunch,
yeah.
And
did you verify any of them?
No, yeah, they could not be verified, and in fact, I think they were lying to me.
And Bob shoots people down all the time. Guys fucking standing on a UFO stage lying bullshit. I mean, you know, so no, he hasn't even. He was hoping one other employee would. However, I have had people that work at Area 51 confirm parts of Bob's story. One in particular saw him coming off the or he says he saw him coming off the Janet flights. I said, will you go on record with me that you met Bob there on the tarmac? No. Why? Everything we did there was confidential. We couldn't even tell our wives. Why would I go on record with you?
And if he did go on, he'd probably get harassed or arrested or...
Yeah, he can't tell you what he ate for lunch out there. You know, that so, and one of the guys I was real excited to talk with just recently passed away. He actually started the bar that was at Area 51. So everybody told the bartender stuff. He started as a flower fund because no one would send flowers to wives when people died out there. But my point is, people have come forward to George, to me. A lot of people are lying, but it adds up over time, man.
I got more than 2 people who have come to me with bits and pieces of the story, who had worked out at Area 51 that I confirmed were out there. Security people who had seen a disc under a tarp in a hangar. Different people had worked there at different times, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, who had little pieces of the story, not to confirm Bob. And then there was one that I pursued. I don't know if you want to keep going on this, but sure. I had pursued this guy. I was trying to find in the early 90s people who were in a position to know about what goes on out there, and I found one. And he had been active in the nuclear weapons program. He had worked for EG&G. He had EG&G had the contract to manage Area 51 from the beginning, all the way through the first 30 or 40 years of it. And so I started basically stalking the guy. One of his sons was a state senator, and he had told me, he confided to me, that you got to ask my dad about UFOs and aliens. And another son had been an FBI agent. So I stalked the guy, introduced myself. There were a couple of public events where I would just show up, and he finally got confident enough in me to invite me to his home. And he gets out these scrapbooks, and he's showing me these stories and clippings and photos from the nuclear weapons program. And I'm watching and taking notes and stuff, and suddenly he closes the book and he goes, "You're not here to talk about this nuclear weapons, are you?" I said, "No, not really." And his wife walks in and she says, "Oh, you're not going to tell him that stuff, are you?" And then he started telling me. And then over the course of 2 years, I would meet with him, have a cup of coffee somewhere. I couldn't take notes. I couldn't record anything, but he told me the story. Now, this guy actually is someone that you've had reference to on your show. Remember Annie Jacobson, her book about Area 51?
Yeah.
Well, it's the same guy, but the story that he told me was different than what he told her. He said that they eventually told me that they had a live alien out there, that I could not go public with this until after he died, that they had craft, that it was in a special spot. Originally it was at Indian Springs, which is now Creech Air Force Base, and then it was moved to Area 51 when 51 became active, and that it was a very small group that tried to analyze this stuff. They didn't know where it was from. They didn't know how we obtained it. He said this thing was alive, and that they eventually were able to communicate with us, and told me that he was going to make a videotape and he was going to make it available so that after he died I could have it. Well, suddenly 2 or 3 years later, he totally changes his story. What had happened was there was a congressional investigator. His name was Richard D'Amato, and he worked for Senator Robert Byrd, and he oversaw black budget projects. And he got onto this UFO story from Whitley Strieber. And so he was assigned, find out what the deal is. So he went around the country, talked to different researchers, and came to me and wanted to know about Area 51 and Lazar. So I told him a story, and I told him about this guy. And he got permission for this guy to violate his security oaths and talk to him about it. And they had multiple conversations, and they went to the founders of EG&G, the company, and it became a dead end. But after that congressional inquiry, this guy completely changed his tune. So he made up this story. which is the one that you heard from Andy Jacobson, that what crashed at Roswell was a Russian technology, Nazi technology, flown by the Russians, containing little concentration camp victims who'd been experimented on by Dr. Mengele. Completely ridiculous, story. But I think he got scared. He was a real guy in a real position to know, and had shared with his family some of this information. I think the story that he told me was legit. But if he made the tape, which I think he did, I didn't get it.
How much time has been wasted talking about bullshit in this subject?
Centuries.
That's part of the problem, isn't it?
People just make it up.
Yeah.
And the more fanciful and ridiculous, the better, unfortunately. People pay more to hear that and consume it.
I had an operation one time after a bizarre thing, somebody who was targeting me, and he had other people helping him, that can convince me that he had worked out there with live aliens. And I'm getting letters from his, supposedly written by his neighbors. Hey, you got to check this guy out, Dr. I'll just say X. He was taken away by armed security in the middle of the night. I think he has something to do with aliens. And from out of the blue, then suddenly I am at a planetarium event, and I'm going to speak about UFOs at some event at this community college. And the guy shows up in a men's room. Hey, my name is Dr. X. Standing there at the urinal. You're not doing a story about me, are you? So no. Who are you? What? This was a concerted effort to get me to believe that he had worked out there. And it went on for a couple of years. And of course, it was complete bullshit. When I finally did dig into his background, I was able to document where he had worked and what he'd been doing through most of his life. And it was just like a fantasy role-playing thing. At least I hope it was.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
The deeper level is so if they're spiritual beings, which I believe they are, it's a binary. They're either, you're on team good or team bad. You can assign any name to it you want, but what are these things? Are they good or bad? And I think some of them are bad. And if the U.S. government knows that, or the people within the U.S. government know that, then they're serving a bad force. And
well, when you spiritual, what makes you draw that conclusion that they're spiritual?
What's the obvious? I mean, spiritual may be the supernatural. They're beyond nature as we understand it. I mean, obviously they are. I mean, just chart their physical behavior. It doesn't, it goes outside of what we understand about physics. No visible means of propulsion, coming at indescribable speed, hitting the ocean, continuing at speeds that are impossible undersea. I mean, in other words, if I take a 9mm round or 7.62 by 39 and shoot you at 50 yards underwater in a swimming pool, and it's even more intense in salt water because it's denser, you could catch the bullet if it even makes it to you, right? So if you have a craft, any object underwater that's traveling at 500 knots as measured by sonar, right there you're challenging our understanding of physics. What is that? How can that be? So yeah,
they've tracked that? They've tracked things going 500 knots under the sea?
Yeah, really, yeah. Much faster than any object can actually go undersea. Yo, for sure. Oh, yeah. There's a lot of stuff going on underwater, and a lot. And there's video of these things coming out of the sky into the water and also emerging from the water.
Right.
Yeah. So
so blurry, though.
I don't think it's that
transmedium video.
Yeah, I don't think it's that blurry. I think some of it's crystal clear.
We just don't access to it? Is that what you mean? We haven't seen it?
Correct.
So they have some stuff.
For sure. So there's just a lot going on underwater, and it's measured. And so whatever. I mean, these are all, again, this is the most obvious observable level of it, but then you just ask yourself, what is this actually? And, if there's been extensive knowledge of this for decades, maybe 80 years at least, if not going back to the 30s, 90 years, to what end? So there are two possible explanations, obvious explanations. The first is the one you often hear, which is this is so heavy that if the public were to know about it, it would be just disruptive. It would be too scary. You don't want to scare people for no good reason. There's nothing we can do about it. And you also don't want to suggest that, the U.S. military isn't capable of protecting the country, the homeland. And it does suggest that. If you can't control these objects in your airspace, and that's known, if they can't, that's known, okay, then that suggests a limit to the power of the U.S. military, and you don't want to tell people that because then they won't believe that they're safe. I get it. But then there's a deeper level, which is okay, what's your relationship with these things? What is the U.S. government's relationship with these things? And there's evidence that there is a relationship and that it's longstanding. And that raises a lot of questions about intent. And so what is that? And I just personally decided, and people have been hurt by these things. That's a fact. That's a fact. It's a knowable fact. It's a provable fact. And killed. And I'm not saying millions of people have been killed by whatever these things are, but people have been killed, and it's known because it's working its way through the courts out of the VA. So, I don't know, an object that is by definition supernatural, it's above the laws of nature as we understand them, and that has resulted in the deaths of people. We don't spend enough time thinking about what that adds up to. Not good, actually, not good.
How people do you think have died from these things?
I don't know, but
radiation sickness, is it what's the
so
cause
the person
of death?
I interviewed someone who was a Stanford medical school professor who's out there and worth talking to, by the way. And
You talking about Gary Nolan?
that's exactly who I'm talking about. Who's effectively an expert witness in these cases, so he's an expert in brain injury. Do you know him?
Yeah.
Yeah. Entirely credible person. Checks all the boxes that I care about. He's got patents, so he's like a lot of Stanford University professors. He's independently rich. I mean, he flew to. I live in a remote place, and he flew to my place at his own expense because he wanted to tell his story. So he's got no profit motive here. He's the most highly credentialed person at the university, practically, at Stanford Medical School. We consider that a big deal. And he's worked on this for over 10 years. Assessing the injuries to U.S. servicemen from being in close proximity to these objects or having contact with these objects. And his conclusion, as you know because you've talked to him, is that there's some kind of energy coming off here that scrambles people's brains or kills them. And it's not exactly radiation, at least in his telling to me. So anyway, but the point is, people have died.
Yeah.
And so, it does raise a lot of questions about what the hell, right? What the hell? American citizens have died and you're hiding it? Why are you hiding that? Why would you hide that?
Perhaps they don't have any explanations because it's so beyond our comprehension that they're still trying to piece it together. I would wonder how much interaction they really do have with these things. If I was from another planet or if I was some interdimensional being, I don't know how much I'd give a shit about the president. I don't know how much I'd give a shit about the government. I would probably look at this infantile race, this species, this bizarre territorial apes with thermonuclear weapons, this very weird species. I'd probably look at them as very chaotic, and I wouldn't really have much concern for who's running it. Especially if they have the ability to travel at insane speeds and go undetected. And
well, it depends. That. Okay, so the template that you're using to understand this is science fiction, right? These are an advanced race of beings from somewhere else. But the template that every other society before us has used is a spiritual one. Mm-hmm. There is a whole world that we can't see that acts on people, a supernatural world that's acting on us all the time for good and bad. Every society has thought this before ours. In fact, every society in all recorded history has thought that until, I'll be specific, August 1945 when we dropped the atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And all of a sudden the West is just officially secular. We're God. There is no God but us. And that's the world that we have grown up in. But that's an anomaly. No one else has ever thought that. There's never been a society that thought that. Every other society has assumed, and they've had all kinds of different explanations, and the details differ. But the core idea does not differ, never has differed from caves until now, that we're being acted on by spiritual forces at all times. And so to someone born before or living before 1945, I think it would have been much more obvious that this is the thing that every society has written about. And in fact, that battle, that unseen battle around us, that spiritual battle, has like been the basis of every society, of every religion, not just Christianity. So, like, it just, once you discard your very, very recent assumptions, relatively speaking, about how the world works, you're like, well, that kind of seems like the obvious explanation, right?
The Joe Rogan Experience.
You and I have some shared interests, clearly, in the world of UFOs, but I want to talk. Most people know of you because of Bigelow Aerospace. They know that you're this billionaire investor and you're a very successful businessman, but you have a deep fascination with UFOs.
Yeah, sure do.
How did it get started?
Back when when I was about 3 years old, which would be about 1947, and actually of May of that year, my grandparents had a very close encounter that was dramatic. And they were taking an evening drive in the late afternoon up into the mountains and coming on back down to Las Vegas. And they saw what appeared to be at first an airplane on fire. And the object became closer and closer to them, and they pulled off to the side of the road. And at one point, then it filled up the windshield, and they thought they were going to die. And at the last second, it shot off and disappeared. And I learned of this story when I was probably 10 years old, and because I was 3 at the time. And my mother had told me this story. So I approached my grandfather, and he wouldn't talk about it. Now, after all these years, like 7 years have gone by, because I was intrigued with it. And so I went to my grandmother, and she only would say a few words, but she wouldn't talk. So I got the story from my mom, and my grandfather had to sit on the side of the road there in the car for a while to recompose himself, and because they thought they were going to die, and then he finally was able to drive on back to Las Vegas. So that was the beginning for me.
Did he describe what you said? It looked like a plane on fire, but like, what was the shape of it as it got closer?
I recall any kind of shape that my mother described. I don't recall that.
But it wasn't a plane. They knew it was something.
That's right. That's right.
Crazy.
So in the family, the family had an event, and I lived right next door to my grandparents, and the family had an event that kind of started things at that date. For me, other personal things came later, but for the family, that was a big deal.
So you said 47?
47.
And 47 was the time of the Roswell crash. 47 was a time there was a lot of UFO activity being observed worldwide, and the speculation is that this had to do with the nuclear bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and all the tests that the United States had done and Russia had done, and that there was a lot of interest in that. Well, actually, Russia hadn't dropped any bombs by that time, right?
Right.
It was after that. But that there was interest in our species by extraterrestrials because they these crazy assholes are detonating nukes. Like, let's go take a look at them.
Right. Well, you had so-called Foo Fighters during the war, these lights that were following bombers, and the tail gunners were the ones that saw them most often, of course, and that happened through the war, and then of course Roswell. But before that was Ken Arnold, right? In about June-ish, and then in July 8th was Roswell.
And there's an uptick though from the Trinity experiments, right?
I think I gather my feeling simply is that without any kind of other evidence or proof that was a huge stimulus. Yeah.
So this was around that time, and you had heard about this as a part of, family discussions.
Right.
And so that sort of ignited the fire initially.
Yeah. And I started asking my friends, as I say, when I was about 10, have you any reports in your family of anything? And by golly, a couple of my close friends told me things that they had never told me before. So, you know, that wasn't necessarily an exclusive event, is what I'm saying. Other people in Las Vegas had seen things at close proximity as well.
Your relationship to this is obviously something that you've carried for so long. It's been an obsession of yours for so long.
Yeah, yeah.
It started with this, but what personal experiences, if any, have you had?
Well, when I was probably 7 or 8, I used to have what I chalked up all my life to just being silly dreams. And I had maybe 5 or 6 of these dreams, and I could never make sense of them. And I would be laying in bed on my side, and typical dream, always the same. There would be 3 short somethings in a kind of monk robe, and so I couldn't see any face, couldn't see any appendages. And these 3 whatevers were standing there, and they were not too far from my eye level as far as the heights and so forth.
So these,
yeah, and so there was nothing I was an avid comic book reader, but there was nothing in the whole genre of comic books that related to that, or movies. And we didn't have television in Las Vegas till 53 or 54, and even after that it was terrible broadcasting, at first. But so it made no sense to me. And so over my lifetime, I never mentioned it to anybody, including my wife. It's funny how you keep things secret, and just kind of for no good reason. Maybe I was be embarrassed to talk about it, but I finally thought, well, maybe it was just dreams, maybe it was something else, and so that was a first event personally that I had at that time in the subject.
When did you start to connect the idea of these tiny people or human-like things with extraterrestrials?
Was later when I began to start my process as a researcher and as a student in the subject, and began to talk with people who made it their business to be experts in abductions. And the more I got into the field and sat writing out questions for the researcher, for the therapist who would be asking the questions, and I'd be sitting there watching the process. And just over time, I thought, well, maybe there was something more to it, but I'm better off not knowing anything, so I'll just block it off and forget about it.
Yeah, I talked last night about John Mack a little bit, the Harvard.
Great guy.
He did a lot of these sort of hypnotic regression sessions with people where they describe very similar scenarios.
Well, yeah, multiple different situations. The abduction phenomena was very proliferate in the population, it seemed like. Even we did a survey called the Roper Poll, and we repeated it 3 times so that the margin of error was really reduced to like 1.5%. And abduction researchers came up with the 10 questions, and so we distributed that, and the conclusion was a relatively sizable percentage of the population had some kind of experiences, according to them, according to the researchers, and according to the poll. I am not qualified to speak to the accuracy of whether the questions were that relevant to the conclusions or not, but that's what they said. And and I had in my own research found people that I put them through a regression, not personally, but I found a hypnotherapist that could do that, and I found a number of people just here, there, scattered around, maybe somebody in my own staff, and they would come up with these stories and these events.
One of the criticisms of John Mack and hypnotic regression in general is that the idea that you can put a memory into someone's head, that you could suggest things and you could create false memories. And this was something that I've read in the criticism of his work, that this style of hypnotic regression and bringing up these very specific scenarios to a bunch of different people, you can sort of help create, especially in people that are easily influenced or people that are open to suggestion. You could put these false memories in their head. And so, you know, especially when you're dealing with something as fantastic as a
Right.
UFO or
Right.
alien abduction or visitation or something like
Right.
that.
Oh, that's definitely possible. There's also something called screen memory, but dealing with the power of suggestion. That's absolutely true. But my experience was with different hypnotherapists, they went out of their way. In fact, maybe if they did make a suggestion, it was just the opposite. They might say, okay, you're on board this craft. You know, where's the lighting coming from? Is it coming from the corner or of the room that you're in? Well, there were no corners, and they'd be corrected right away by the person being hypnotized. And so they went just the opposite direction on purpose to make suggestions to maybe coax the person to come that direction, and they wouldn't do it. The person wouldn't do it. Now, screen memory is different. Supposedly, if somebody has a very close encounter with supposedly somebody that's ET, you leave that the memory turns out to be entirely different, and that's put into you consciously, and you recall something entirely different than what actually happened. Maybe you saw two deer on the road, or
Right.
something of that sort, or maybe there were owls or whatever. So that's what's purported to be.
Catch new episodes of The Joe Experience for free only on Spotify. Watch back catalog JRE videos on Spotify, including clips. Easily, seamlessly switch between video and audio experience. On Spotify, you can listen to the JRE in the background while using other apps and can download episodes to save on data cost, all for free. Spotify is absolutely free. You don't have to have a premium account to watch new JRE episodes. You just need to search for the JRE on your Spotify app. Go to Spotify now to get this full episode of the Joe Rogan Experience.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
And then there's the moon.
And then the weird too.
The moon's really
The moon's super
the
weird.
size of the moon directly corresponding, like when it's in orbit with the sun, completely blocks out the sun perfectly.
It's 400th the size of the sun, and it's 400 times closer to the Earth than the sun. You never see the dark side, which is very weird. It's actually, I believe it's closer to the Earth than what you would normally expect for a moon.
And it's huge.
It's huge. You have cultures actually talking about a pre-moon period, and it's stabilizing the climate. You have the Zulu cultures talking
Yeah.
about this. And then this is the weirdest stuff about the moon. Apollo 11, I believe, when the booster took off on the moon, they were like, "Oh, we think it might be hollow," and it's it seems like actually the outer layer of the moon is less dense, or sorry, is more dense than lower layers, which pattern matches only to an excavation site. That's obviously an Earth. The lower you go, it's more dense, right? And so Apollo 12, they intentionally crashed the booster of the lunar vehicle onto the moon. They put seismometers there, and they said that it rang like a bell. This is all fact. You could look all this
Yeah.
stuff. It's super weird.
It is really weird. I know you did an episode about that with Randall Carlson.
Love Randall.
Yeah, he's got some wild fucking theories too. But the idea that the moon was somehow another place there to stabilize our atmosphere is so crazy.
It is crazy. And you obviously have to sort of think in probabilities all the way down. Lowest probability, craziest thing is Ingo Swann, who is another remote viewer in the Stargate program. He wrote a book called Penetration, where he's basically like abducted by this guy in a suit, like this kind of Men in Black style guy named Axelrod, and he is told to remote view the moon. And he remote views an alien base on the moon. And he says that he gets it. The whole thing goes crazy. I mean, the book is insane. It's like he then ends up in a supermarket and he says that he senses that this woman at the produce aisle is like an alien or something. But a lot of people from that Stargate program remote viewed, structures on the dark side of the moon and that sort of thing. So,
well, AJ from the Y Files was on, and he was the one that was telling us that there's photos, right, of the dark side of the moon, that someone had seen photos and was assuming that these would be released shortly, that there were structures. Wow, this is going to be the biggest news ever, and then it was never released.
are you talking about Carl Wolf?
Is that what it was?
Who was taken to, this is all his claims, and he died in a freakish bike accident a little after saying this. But he said that there was like in like Langley, Virginia, where a lot of spooky stuff goes on. He was taken to some it was like inside a mountain complex, which we definitely, Carl Wolf, yeah.
Bikes?
Apparently not enough.
That guy could die any time
on
a scooter. So photographs of the 1960s lunar orbiter mission that revealed large base of the moon. Hear what he's saying?
It's a 4-minute video.
Just hear a little bit of it.
Scan one section of the moon, then another and another, and then they would get a larger image. So this mosaic then would be put in that contact printer, and that was then a print that was issued to whomever, the press, the scientist, whatever, wherever that was intended to go. So he was showing me how all this worked, and we walked over to one side of the lab, and he said, by the way, we've discovered a base on the back side of the moon. And I said, whose? What do you mean, whose? He said, yes, we've discovered a base on the back side of the moon. And at that point, I became frightened, and I was a little terrified, thinking to myself that if anybody walks in the room now, I know we're in jeopardy, we're in trouble, because he shouldn't be giving me this information. I was fascinated by it, but I also knew that he was overstepping a boundary that he shouldn't be stepping over. And then he pulled out one of these mosaics and showed this base, which had geometric shapes. There were towers, there were spherical buildings, there were very tall towers, and things that looked somewhat like radar dishes, but they were large structures. So I didn't say any more to him because I was concerned again that somebody was going to come in at any moment, would catch us having this conversation, and we would be in real trouble. I realized that he was telling me this information because he didn't have anybody else to talk to. Now, probably in that laboratory, he was probably one of the few enlisted people, and he was a worker bee. And he had a high-level security clearance, obviously, but he couldn't share that information with anybody else. And in those days, we didn't. When you had your security clearance, you took it seriously. It isn't like today where people don't take these things seriously. We had a different set of morals and ethics and values. That's the way we were raised, and we stayed bound by those agreements. So it was rare that someone would do something like this, but this fellow and I were the same rank. I think he was very distressed. He had the same pallor and demeanor as the scientists outside the room. They were just as concerned as he was, and he needed to discuss it with somebody. So that was the end of it right there. I didn't take it any further than that. I just filed it away. But the interesting thing, every day that I went home, I would think to myself, I can't wait to hear about this on the news, And, so I'd turn on the TV and I'd look at the news to see if they're going to announce, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon, being really naive, And, of course, here it is 30-some years later, and we still haven't heard about it.
Whoa.
Pretty crazy.
Yeah, but there's the question of disinformation, right? Like, you could conceivably give people a bunch of nonsense and tell them about it, knowing that some of it is going to leak, and it's going to and it won't be verified, and it's going to make this whole story seem even more ridiculous and make people less likely or reluctant to study it.
Totally. And in his case, he says that he was in this, mountain base or whatever, where all of the world's nations were working together as part of some collegial UN style space program or whatever. So that to me might be a little, beyond the pale. And I'm glad you made that point, because that is ufology 101. And I've heard you be incredibly exhausted and frustrated at UFO disclosure. And I think that is the reasonable response. It is limited hangouts on limited hangouts. It's just we're going to give you a little bit, but we're also going to sprinkle in some falsities and some bullshit. We're going to stigmatize it. And it kind of works because it creates this initiation path for recruiting if there are any of these programs. It widens the surface area. It both conditions the populace but also stigmatizes the thing and makes it seem like kind of a joke. And so I think if you are not viewing modern disclosure through that kind of hermeneutic lens of like interpretation, and you're just taking it, accepting it, imbibing it wholeheartedly, like prima facie, I think you are in trouble.
Yeah.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Stuff is landing or crashing around the world, and unexpected countries have had this happen, and that's why I picked that, because I thought that was a interesting case. And then, of course, Pope Pius XII and the Vatican were involved, back-channeling it through the OSS, which became the CIA later, to FDR, and that's how the U.S. knew something weird happened in Italy right before World War II, but...
So this 33 was the first, documented?
That is the earliest one I can talk about, yeah.
There's something that predates that?
You could infer that.
Yeah. So this 33 one you said was in Italy?
Yeah, magenta. So it's, I'm bad at geography. I think that's like a Lombardy region. It's like northwest Italy.
And what's the story behind it?
So basically it looked like it crashed, right? The original shape most likely was like a lenticular disc-like craft, with like two dinner plates.
What
right?
does lent to mean?
So like two dinner plates, smushed together, right? The hump, and there's like a, like a bubble on top.
Like the classic,
saucer. Like that.
Like that. Okay.
But it looks like when it hits, the edges broke off, so it became this like bell or acorn shaped thing. And there was nothing in it. It was like just an artifact. There was no biological remnants, if you will. So it's so funny because the Italians were so confused. They actually called up the Germans and they were like, is this one of your Wunderwaffe? Like, what the hell just crashed in northern Italy? Mussolini. And this is all publicly available information because some Italian researchers found all these original documents that some people were sitting on for years in Italy. They put a gag order on the press, etc. And Mussolini asked the Germans to come down. And of course, the Germans came down and they were like, that is not ours, but let's look at it together. So that's kind of perhaps a tertiary reason the kind of Axis powers got together. I'm not saying that's like the reason, but I think the Italians and the Germans were so intrigued with what they found from like an artifact perspective. There was at least some scientific and military collaboration during the war, the details of which I'm not sure of, but I know people that know that specific event that are currently still intel officers within this program in detail. But
So were there witnesses to the crash or some sort of an understanding that something had crash landed and then they discovered it?
Yeah, I forget the precise discovery. I don't know if it was like local police officers or local farmers found it in the field, something like that. I don't want to misspeak. I assume some of the Italian researchers might have some fact witnesses that can orally say, oh, yeah, my great-grandfather found it or something like that. But I don't remember off the top
What
of
was
my
the
head.
scale of this vehicle?
It was probably like 20 feet by 10 feet, something like that. Not super huge, but kind of big.
Do they think this was a drone? Do they think that this was occupied?
There was nothing in it. So if it was piloted, if you will, by some sentience, I mean, your guess is as good as mine, so...
So what happened to that vehicle?
So we knew where it was being stored at a particular location after the crash, and then the military came in and we grabbed it towards the end of the war, 1944, 1945, because, like I said, Pope Pius XII already kind of let FDR know.
Why the involved? Because in Italy?
Well, interestingly enough, there's like a whole history of human intelligence prior to World War II, and old money, the Vatican, the Italian mob, kind of the old country boys did a lot of informal intelligence collection for the U.S. And there's probably some books you can read on it, but it's really interesting. Human intelligence collection wasn't really formalized until the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which became the CIA in 1947. You had Paul Mellon and all these other affluent guys of all these old money families that basically created the CIA. So that's probably the reason why.
So this thing that was recovered, this was the first documented one that the United States had access to?
I can't get into the first or not, but it was an early one. Yeah.
So it's almost 100 years ago.
Yes.
And so they take this thing and then they bring it where?
Yeah, I can't get into those.
Can't get
details.
into that.
No.
Okay. They bring it somewhere in the United States. And was the attempt to try to back engineer this thing? Was the attempt to try to understand what it was?
I mean, first of it, obviously, it's understanding the situation, right? What do we have our hands on? And like I've said in some other videos and stuff, we took the Manhattan Project secrecy and overlaid it on this issue because that secrecy worked well for atomic bomb developments and whatnots. And certainly this whole program in a nutshell, if I were to summarize the 90 plus years of history, it is a reverse engineering program to garner some kind of insight. And of course, not a lot of the things that we've learned from it are directly, ripped off the technology we found, but it has inspired other innovations that made its way into other U.S. classified programs over the year for national defense reasons, and it's a myriad of different things. So
the UFO folklore is that this is where fiber optics were discovered first.
Yeah, going to break the seal on anything we've discovered or anything like that, and it's a place I can't go to.
How limited are you in what you can discuss and what you can't discuss, and why?
Yeah.
Why do they let you discuss any of this?
Yeah, so anything sensitive that I want to say as it relates to U.S. government activity, whether it be intelligence stuff, military stuff, etc., I have to submit it through what they call DOPSR, DoD Office of Pre-Publication and Security Review. That is something anybody who's been an intel officer, anybody with a clearance, has to submit that kind of stuff. Now, obviously, if you're writing a book about gardening, you don't have to. But if you're going to talk about anything military and intelligence related, you have to submit. So it's kind of a catch-22 for this office, right? They're only looking at it from a security perspective. They're not vouching for it or anything like that. And that's like any author, right? They could write a book about Navy SEALs and they're not vouching for the story. They're vouching that you didn't say any nasty code words. You didn't burn a specific ongoing classified program. And for them, I mean, I'm not in their OODA loop, but certainly it's a catch-22 for them where if they want to redact and they propose a redaction, they're like, hey, Dave, you can't say these sentences. You can rewrite it and resubmit. You know, we can't necessarily tell you what agency said to redact it, but you're not allowed to say this. They would be basically self-certifying there's a there. So in my opinion, probably the policy is like, if it has to deal with the subject, we're not saying anything. We're not proposing any redactions. As long as he's not burning a conventional program, we kind of have to allow him to exercise his First Amendment rights. And so I think it's like a catch-22 for that office is kind of the short of the long answer. So
this is essentially one of the very early ones, 1933. Mm-hmm. How many crash retrieval incidents have there been?
It is double digit. The specific numbers I do know, however, I can't discuss that. And I know it sounds like, oh, I'm being coy or whatever, but you know, this show, any other interviews I do, right? You know, foreign intelligence services are watching, and it's like, I'm not here to help Russia and China calibrate their intelligence collection. Like, oh, Dave said it's this number. We missed a couple. Shit. Let's put it out for the KGB, SVR, and GRU are now going to hit the streets to try to figure out which ones they missed. So I'm here to protect national security, and I'm just trying to put all the general topics out there for public conversation to hold our government accountable, really. So, because I'm here as a fact witness, because we have a constitutional oversight issue, because this program has not been reported to Congress in the appropriate way, and I can get into a senator I talked to that has died recently, so I can, explain to you why I'm so sure. Besides what I read, which we can get into what intel reports I read, I did get some stuff cleared. So during my investigation, I'm like, you know what? I need to talk to somebody at the highest levels, right? So, and this will give you an idea of the kind of people we talk to. And this is the only one I'm going to talk about using their name because they died 2 years ago. So in spring 2021, I actually flew with a couple colleagues of mine to Las Vegas. And I met with Senator Harry Reid about 9 months before he died. And of course, he's a private citizen now. And I wanted to brief him on the topic, and I wanted to get his kind of thought leadership on it because, he was a Gang of Eight member, right? Which is the top most cleared senators and congressmen. He was the majority leader, for God's sakes, of the Senate. And I knew, he helped sponsor the OSAP program that I mentioned and where they looked at Skinwalker Ranch and some other things. And I wanted to understand, what does Harry Reid actually know? Why did he give $21 million to DIA and Bigelow Aerospace for this? So I'm sitting there in Harry Reid's living room, right next to him with some other witnesses that were there with me. And he straight up says, he's like, yeah, I knew we had UFO material. I was denied access for decades. I tried to get access. And then he explained some of his efforts during OSAP. And I was like, holy shit, did the former majority leader just say, did he just confirm this to me as well? I was already talking to these amazing high-level people, but I have Harry Reid literally saying, yes, we have material, and, he knew it was non-human.
Did Harry have personal experience with this?
I don't know if he's had any personal stuff in his personal life.
I mean, did he?
He said, in terms of seeing the material himself, he said he was denied access for years, decades was his term. And he actually told me on behalf of me, he had a weekly call with President Joe Biden at the time. And he straight up said to me, he was going to talk to President Biden about this issue, literally. And then what he was telling me about OSAP, I was like, holy shit, I have 20 other people that told me this, dude. So the real history, what fucking OSAP was, because I think there's a lot of people out there that think they were looking at ghosts, Skinwalker Ranch. Yes, they went to the ranch as a secondary and tertiary objective. But the real reason, so there's a document that came out a couple years ago through FOIA from the Defense Intelligence Agency. There was this special access program request that Harry Reid, you might have seen this, I think George Knapp and company have reported on this, that he sent to the Deputy Secretary of Defense, William Lynn. And it was asking for one of the most serious SAPs you can ask for, what they call a bigoted, waived special access program. So waived means it's limited congressional reporting. That is a class of special access programs. And bigoted means it's by name. And it was you could read the FOIA document. It was Harry Reid, James Inhofe, Lou Elizondo, etc. And I'm like, why are you asking for the most serious SAP to be created for a program that ostensibly is looking at Skinwalker Ranch and stuff? And it doesn't make any sense. So what really happened there, and Harry Reid, God bless his soul, made this disclosure a couple weeks after we met in the New Yorker, and you can look this up. I think it was a May 2021 New Yorker story where he says, I knew for decades, and he made this disclosure, not me, so I'm going to say the name of the contractor. Harry Reid said this. We knew that Lockheed Martin had this material for decades. I tried to get access, and I was denied. And specifically with the Lockheed Martin stuff, he was talking about during the OSAP program. And for the people who are on this program, I submitted this shit to the officer, got this cleared, so don't freak out, but I'm telling the truth here. So Lockheed Martin wanted to divest itself from this material at a specific facility that's known to me that I provided to the Inspector General, street address, all that shit, right? And the idea was if they made a security catcher's mitt for this shit, most serious SAP possible, the contractor and the other government customer, which was the Central Intelligence Agency, for that specific Lockheed material. And it was shit that they recovered from like the 50s and stuff. And it was like bits and pieces of like hull structure, shit like that. And so they were going to tech transfer it, and the $21 or $22 million was actually for Bigelow Aerospace to build out, facilities in Las Vegas and material analysis equipment. And I saw the staff meeting slides, I saw the paperwork. Like there's a paperwork trail I've seen on this shit, and I talked to the people involved in this program.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
I get occasionally called by somebody from inside. And what I think they're doing, first of all, one, we may be faking a UFO situation for reasons that I don't understand.
If we're making a UFO situation, do you think that there's technology that's available to people in the United States that is beyond our current understanding of what's possible?
90% no.
90%?
Because
wow.
it's very hard. It's very hard to imagine physicists continuing to work on nothing for their entire careers. The number of people who are going to be retiring shortly, having never actually done physics as a physicist. We're talking about wasted lives. People are going to be very weird when they realize that they blew their entire career. And I believe I can say what many of these problems are. And if you want to humiliate me at a leading university, just ask me to talk. You can put it on video. You don't realize how many things the Standard Model has subtly wrong when we explain it to people. It's not that the Lagrangian is wrong, not that the rules are wrong, but we say wrong stuff. We say like there are 3 generations that are only of matter that are only distinguished by mass. In other words, there's 3 copies of this stuff here. This is like the wood version, and then there's the plastic version, and then there's the metal version. There aren't 3, there are 2 generations plus an extra imposter generation, which looks like a generation. I mean, I can get into these things. And that should be a provocation that somebody says, let's call this guy up, have him out, and figure out what he's talking about. Doesn't matter. I don't think we're doing physics.
What he's doing?
I think we are playing paintball rather than going to war, and we're giving prizes for generals who command the best paintball army. And then we're referencing everyone else who's actually trying to figure out how to fight to, well, have you submitted to the paintball competition? It's like, no, I don't want to do paintball. I understand that it keeps your skills up. I understand that some of them are transferable. But I mean, like, you've been in street fights?
Not since I was...
Yeah, well, I understand. Like, I haven't been for a long time. It's different than what you guys do in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There's lots of stuff you're not allowed to do.
Yeah.
Right. You get in a street fight, it's a completely different thing.
Sure.
What we're doing is not physics in the same sense.
So what they're doing is
we're doing safe stuff. Yeah, exactly.
They're exercising.
And the exercises are keeping people limber. They're keeping people in a fighting mentality. It's not that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has nothing to do with fighting. We've seen people use it in the street for sure, right? But small joint manipulation is part of street fighting. Eye gouging is part of street fighting. Pulling a knife is part of street fighting. These things are not part of any reputable gym that you might go to. So I want to do the thing that isn't paintball. And I didn't want to do it up until recently because the danger of unleashing a neutron on the world is so high. Now I realize I'm done with that. You guys are willing to play footsies with Putin? You're not going to survive. You're not the responsible adults I thought you were. Like, if I unleash a neutron and it leads to some sort of proliferation of deadly technology, it's on you. It's not on me. You're already taking risks that you shouldn't be taking.
So if you think 90% sure that this is not coming from here, you believe this because you don't think that the proper science in order to achieve these kind of results is being done by the people that you believe are capable of doing it?
That's correct. I know that, for example, when I talk to Nima, or when I talk to Juan Maldacena, or when I've talked to Natty Seiberg, these people are absolutely brilliant. And they don't know the answer unless they're the greatest actors I've ever seen.
So those brilliant physicists are looking at these supposed videos? Like, what is the best,
I
most
don't.
compelling?
Sorry, UFO stuff.
What are you talking about then?
They're not talking about things that can extend Einstein.
Right.
Therefore, to get back to your technology question, might have engineering applications, because it's the engineering applications that are terrifying.
Right.
The discovery of the neutron was one thing. The Teller-Ulam design was its weaponization. So suddenly, you can do the Tsar bomb or Castle Bravo, these unbelievable explosions, which, like, the difference between there were Civil War veterans who saw action in the Civil War who lived to see Ivy Mike in the Pacific. So the Civil War was almost a thermonuclear war in terms of human scale. It's less than 100 years different. People have forgotten how terrifying, important, wonderful, jaw-dropping, and awesome physics is, because it hasn't done anything that completely screws your mind.
Like Hiroshima or Nagasaki.
Or Castle Bravo.
What's Castle Bravo?
That was the test in the Pacific where we thought it was going to be like controlled and like, or what is it, Starfish, where we did an atmospheric explosion over Hawaii, and then the Russians like, hold my beer, Nova Zemlya.
Yeah.
We remember, I'm the guy 5 years ago who was saying we need above ground nuclear tests because all you people have lost your fear. Like, yes, Eric is crazy, but he's correct.
What's this one? That's Castle Bravo.
Oh, shit.
Oh my God.
Right. Like,
so they detonated it in that facility, and they expected it to be far smaller than it was?
They detonated in the Pacific.
Right. But it's right next to that facility that was in the video.
Yeah.
Was that the facility that was initially filmed? Like,
yeah.
What is this facility?
That's it. It was Inawak, I forget, Atoll. So, like,
it's crazy how long ago that was and how close it was to the Civil War, if you really put it in that context.
Well, this is what I'm trying to say, is what I'm trying to tell you.
Look at that. That's so insane.
Have you done this in Oculus?
No, I have not.
I highly recommend, if they're not going to do a nuke above ground so that we can save ourselves by fear.
Oh, look at that.
Right, this is religious stuff, Joe.
Yeah, it is religious
like
stuff.
We have announced, if somebody is listening to these tests that we did, my belief is very shortly before you get the ability to traverse the cosmos, if that is possible, you let off a nuke. Right? It's like you've had kids. There's some stuff that happens right before they figure out how to break out of the crib.
That's part UFO folklore,
I know.
too. Fat Man and Little Boy. That's a big part of UFO. That once they dropped those, that's when all the UFOs started appearing.
So the question is the analogy I give. So I talked to Avi about the following thing. I am a fan of something I call the doubly scientific method. The usual scientific method makes a hidden assumption that it never voices, which is, if we're going to study orcas, we assume that we are smarter than orcas. Or if we're going to study cephalopods, right, like an octopus, we think we're smarter. And what do? We disguise ourselves. We create artificial environments. We do all sorts of crazy things based on the fact that we're smarter than what we study, from everything from rocks to orcas. The doubly scientific method says, okay, assume that you're studying a rat in a maze, but you yourself are the rat in somebody else's maze. Now you have to look up the intelligence scale, not just down. And in the doubly scientific method, you have to assume that whatever is studying you is hiding from you the way you are hiding from your subjects. So if you see somebody in a duck blind, for example, and he's studying ducks, you understand that somebody may be hiding from you. And they might be able to use multiple dimensions of time. They might be able to cloak themselves and disguise themselves. Or, for example, if you take microscopic UFOs, this cup has a radius of r and a circumference of 2 pi r. The disk that it spans is pi r squared in area. But if you look at this cup, it's much larger than pi r squared because we pushed it out. You could have a sphere where, if you could cheaply engineer space-time, not through the Einstein field equations, but through the successor theory that recovers Einstein, you could have an entire stadium inside of a tennis ball. Just the way this cup doesn't blow your mind until you realize that its area is much greater than pi r squared. Why look for a giant floating thing in the sky? If you could bend space and time and you could play with the rulers the way I'm saying, I would put this in a tiny little profile.
Whoa. So we're only looking at, in terms of our understanding of the distance between objects, planets, gravity. We're looking at that. All that stuff where if it didn't exist, if somehow or another we lived in some contained environment and we had no concept of space whatsoever, and then we gained access to it, we would be unbelievably overwhelmed. If you lived in some sort of underground facility your entire life,
love this,
and then one day you got a chance to go outside and see the Keck Observatory in Hawaii, in a clear night with no moon, you would be overwhelmed. You wouldn't be able to believe that the world was as big as it really was, or that the universe was as big as it was.
Yeah, impedance mismatch. If you watch meteor showers the way my family does, it's religious. It's transformational. It's transcendent. Yeah. The problem, as you know, from the default mode network, right, is that mostly what your brain is doing is not communicating information, but screening. Right, your eyes, your fovea is precious because that's the thing that can resolve at very high levels.
Yeah.
But like, I can barely see Jamie out of the corner of my eye because my peripheral vision can't be at the same level as my fovea. I'd be overwhelmed.
Right.
So we're talking about tapping in to a picture of the world that we are not. Our brain is not prepared for the idea that time is multidimensional. That was the whole point of giving Lex another watch. We don't have a way to think about, I'll meet you at 5:15 and 12:30, according to two different scales of time. Or, for example, time and space, if I'm correct, the 14-dimensional manifold that has all the quantum going on it is split probably 7 and 7 dimensions, because we have 6 extra time dimensions and 4 extra space. Add 6 to 1 and 3 to 4, and you get 7. So space and time are interchangeable. There's a duality between them. All of this stuff is like, okay, it's how you hit on chicks in a bar. Hey, let me tell you something about space and time you never thought about.
Oh, my God.
But, what? Worked for me.
Do you think, now when you were talking about these people that keep mananaing you and not giving you access to whatever they're talking about, do you think they're talking about some sort of an engineering solution to this type of technology?
I haven't met in striking distance in 3 years.
So how do you have something that you don't, that's going to change your way of looking? Is it possible that you've missed something?
Must be wrong. First of all, like this is my life's work.
What's
right?
the way they raised it to you? About it changing the way you see the world.
Eric, I'll complain about data and like, that's not the data we have. What we've been showing the public is downsampled, meaning that it's fuzzier, it's low resolution. Like, how clear is it? As clear as you want. How clear are you that there's something to see? You can see it with your own eyes. There's no question.
Dude, if I was just shut the fuck up and let them show me, I'd be like, let's go.
I'm under any NDA.
I'm saying,
But you want to know in a different look. My life's work is a theory. It's one theory. My entire life is really about one theory. Okay? Like I do this entertainment thing and I talk to people and all this stuff. Bullshit. Really what I am is an academic who realized that you can't do academics inside of the university system and watch it disintegrate into madness as we speak. I figured this out a long time ago. I want to know whether this is right or wrong so much better, so much more than I want to know whether UFOs exist. UFOs, to me, are an indication of whether I'm right or wrong. You see, it's data. It's an input to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because
so if you're right, that means...
If future, it means we can leave, not the planet, but the solar system. We can explore, the cosmos are traversable. If we can leave, anything else can visit. If you look at the entirety of the universe and you imagine that ultimately there are societies that destroy themselves because they get atomic weapons before they figure out how to leave. Some societies are smarter than that. And they'll be able to leave and colonize the cosmos. And for them not to be here would be madness.